All right. So, today's a big day. Woohoo. Um, today's a big day for a couple reasons. One is curriculum, as you have known it up to this point, is done. Um, so, you've got one more tech interview left. Some of you might have yours later this week for week 8, but there's one next week. There's some career services stuff, most definitely, which is incredibly important. But curriculum, as you know it, is done as of today. And now where you are in the context of the cohort is at the point where you get to take everything you have learned up to this day and start to apply it to a bigger project. If this was a university class, we'd be calling this your capstone project. If this was a degree path or some, certificate path or something like that. This is just your final project for the cohort, and one of the things I want to encourage you from the beginning is that this is just one more project that you're building. You've already built several projects. This is one more. It's just you get 2 weeks to do this one instead of one. So I want you to take it seriously, but I don't want you to elevate it to some level of magical importance that it doesn't have. Yes, it is the main thing that employers are going to look at to determine where you are and what you contribute to a project. But the thing is, your completion of the project is what's important. So I'm going to go through my my kind of sermon on how to properly approach the planning of a project. And in doing so, I'm going to highlight a few things that you heard probably from that guy about 4 weeks ago. But I'm also going to really focus on some things that not only do I want you to think about for your final project, but I want you to keep in context for anything that you are going to build going forward. And the last disclaimer I will give is that, yes, I am incredibly opinionated about this content. More than just my normal incredibly opinionated self. Like I literally say, I can say I wrote the book on this. Please understand that while some of the things I'm going to say are going to come across as very dogmatic, you must do it this way, please understand this is one viewpoint. That being said, if you do it this way, it works, I promise. So, most of you are probably coming into today already with at least one idea for what you want to build, probably multiple ideas. I've talked to several groups. I've talked to a number of people who are like, well, we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this thing this way. And yes, that is exactly where you want to be. You want to be in that idea stage, and it's okay to not have finalized exactly what you want to do as of today. Because we always start with the big abstract idea. This is the one time in all of software development where the words, wouldn't it be cool if, are okay. Because we say, wouldn't it be cool if we had an app that did something? Wouldn't it be cool if there was an app that would show us the nearest dog that we could go pet? Wouldn't it be cool if there was, something that would plot where the nearest nap room was on a map, and we could just go and have a nap like that? I would actually pay money and download that right now. And then the other method of this that we have is we say, let's build X for Y. There's the Uber for whatever, or the LinkedIn for doctors, or whatever it may happen to be. The classic example, of course, is Tinder for cats. Where we're taking a business model, we're taking an interaction style, we're taking basically a mechanic of an app, and we are applying it to a different demographic. And that's where we tend to see apps fall into a number of very common categories. Bar Finder is one of the big categories. You want to find a bar for you and your buddies to go hang out at, so, bars near me on Google. Or you download an app that does it and shows you all the ones, and it's got ratings, and my friends recommended this one. And there's a very definite mechanic we have there, and what ends up happening is anytime you're building an app where you are trying to get two people in the same place at the same time to share an activity, it's a bar finder. Or it's a dating app, one of the two. Because the whole point is either the activity or getting the two people in the same place at the same time. So we start to see big categories and big buckets shake out of the process of pursuing the big idea. But what we don't realize when we're doing this is that in every single case when we're asking these questions, we are asking about data. Your data is your product. Have I told you guys my Tweetbookagram story? No? Okay. So the idea that your data is your product is easily illustrated. So imagine, hypothetically, there was this big social media site called Tweetbookagram. It's where everyone goes to post all their stuff and send invites to Candy Crush and poke people and like and share and retweet and all of that. Tweetbookagram, everybody's on it. Everybody's got the app on their phone. But in this same universe where Tweetbookagram exists, there's also an evil little wizard that hates social media. So what he decides he's going to do is he's going to cook up a spell, and he waves his magic wand, casts the spell, and the website and the app for Tweetbookagram disappear, vanish from existence. Worldwide tragedy, makes the 6 o'clock news. TMZ reports a conspiracy theory on it, has something to do with Justin Bieber, but nobody knows about it because it's not shared all over Tweetbookagram. And it's a big deal. Worldwide productivity spikes 20%. But at the end of the day, Tweetbookagram employs like 1,000 devs. So they all jump in, they rebuild it from scratch. They even add a couple new features. They get something out in the App Store in about 10 days, 2 weeks. Tweetbookagram is back up and running again, unlike Garav's alarm clock. Everybody's back to sharing cat pictures and misattributed quotes, and the universe is in a good place. Well, that pisses off the wizard even more. So what he does is he cooks up another spell, and he waves his magic wand, and the database and all the backups for Tweetbookagram disappear. App still on your phone, domain still exists, you can go to it, but there's no data. There's no friends, there's no pictures that you've shared, there's no events for you to say that you're interested in going to and then ghost on. Like, there's nothing there. Tweetbookagram, done. They don't survive that. That's not something that the devs can quickly go and type in all your data again. And in fact, what it points out is that all the features that might exist in Tweetbookagram only exist for the purpose of giving access to the data. Any app, any service, any website that you use on a regular basis, you're not using it because it has pretty drop-downs. You're not using it because it has a blue navigation bar. You're not using it because it works on your phone. You're using it because it gives you access to a particular set of data in a way that gives you benefit. And unfortunately, we don't spend enough time, in my opinion, as devs, focusing on that fact, bless you. Because we don't focus on that fact, we get lost in, oh my God, I'm writing such cool code. Oh, I get to use this library. That's going to make a cool app. We get lost in that. And that's the wrong focus. We as devs build products, and those products give access to data. That's the whole point. And so if we start off in thinking about planning this final project and thinking about all the things that we need to do before we put hands on keys, and focus that attention on making sure that the data is correct and that we know how we're going to present it, we're going to come out with a better product at the end of the day. So there's 3 questions you can ask yourself. What is the data you can access or acquire? Is it going to come from an API? Is a user going to give it to you? Are you going to pull it from weather sensors? Like, where are you going to get your data? Most of the time, it either comes from some external source like an API or a user is giving it to you. But you have to know the source of that data before you can start working with it or presenting it in any way. Then, can you correlate that data to something else? Individual data points are not interesting. They're not compelling in any way. If I tell you that it's, well, let's find out. It is 7 degrees outside. Great. That tells you that one simple block of information. If I tell you that at this time yesterday it was 11 degrees and that now it's 7, now we've got some correlation over time. We see that today was colder than yesterday. We have more insights. For example, if I told you that Bassam was late to lecture, that individual data point, not too interesting. If I told you that he was late today but he wasn't late yesterday, now there's a correlation. Now we're looking at a trend over time. Some of you, the trend has been going on for some time. So the correlation is where the value really starts to come in. If I was plotting out ice cream trucks in Vancouver, great. I may know the GPS coordinates or the address for where an ice cream truck is at any moment, but if I don't know where that is in comparison to me, how close it is and how likely I am to be able to go and buy, you know, like a popsicle, then it's not too interesting. The correlation is what really matters. And then the last question you want to ask yourself is, how do I pivot that data to add value? What is the presentation of that correlation that really people are going to be interested in? What is it that makes it cool? And it doesn't matter whether you are building something that's reporting weather data from sensors that are strapped to trees in northern Idaho. It doesn't matter if you are building a game where a unicorn is flying across space and shooting carrots out of its nose. What matters is that you are able to present that data in a compelling, beneficial way. So we have to ask, what is beneficial? Beneficial is understanding the difference between these two things. Like I said, you don't use the apps and services that you use because of their features. You're not using it because of the font choice. You're not using it because of the autocomplete library that they built in there. You're using it because it benefits you. So customers, users don't pay for features. And when I say pay, I mean money or time. The cool features that you build in are not going to be why someone uses the app. The reason someone uses the app is going to be the features that you built give them a benefit of accessing the data in a meaningful way. And if we want to define meaningful, it's really easy. It's one of these 4 things. Because these 4 things are what drive people to make the decisions we make. As much as I would love to say that we are all rich, complex snowflakes with nuance and subtlety, at the end of the day, every single decision we make is driven by one of these 4 universal values. We want to look good, feel good, save time, save money. When I say look good, I mean that we want other people to think that we make good choices. We want other people to think that we are smart and funny and athletic and attractive and charming and all of the things, all the positive check things that we want people to think about us. We also want to feel good. When we get up in the morning and we will look in the mirror and we have to face ourselves one-to-one, we want to feel those same things about ourselves. The funny part of that is there are things we will do to look good that don't make us feel good. Drinking on Friday nights. There are things we will do to feel good that don't make us look good. We often call that integrity. We also want to save time. We don't know how much we have. You know, the crane could topple over, take us all out right now. We can't control that. We don't, morbid, I know, but true. But we want to save time. We didn't build spreadsheets because we like doing 2-column accounting by hand. We didn't build escalators because we thought, oh, you know what, stairs are fine. We do think we use technology to save time, to automate the drudgery tasks that we have in our lives. We also want to save money, and money doesn't just mean cash in your pocket. It's also the fuel in your gas tank, it's the clothes in your closet, it's all the assets and resources that you have acquired in your life. And we want to save that. We want to conserve it. We're not just going to give it away willy-nilly. So whatever we're going to bring into our lives and use and make the decision that it's now something that's going to be part of our everyday, it's got to speak to one of these four things. And again, it could be an app where there's a unicorn flying through space shooting carrots out of its nose at aliens. And if that makes you feel good, fantastic, play the game. I mean, that's why video games are so popular. They make us feel good. It's why people gamble. It makes us feel good. You know, there's lots of things that we do that we get that dopamine hit off of, and we feel good doing it. But you've got to make sure when you're building a product that you expect other people to use, that it touches on at least one of these. Otherwise, no one's going to be interested. No one's going to care. Otherwise, it just becomes like an exercise that you have to submit and get a mentor to review at some point. And that's not what this is about. This is about you demonstrating that you can build a product. So, user stories. User stories are the foundation of everything that you're going to do. Because user stories give you the recipe, the pattern, the blueprint for the features that you are going to build that benefit someone. So, pulled from a Medium article that was written about 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago, still relevant today. This format of user story combines a title, the user story, the user scenario, and then the metadata that is associated with that user story. So this was published on Medium, medium.com, and so the author of this article, whose last name I can never remember how to pronounce, wrote the user stories on there as if he was talking about Medium itself. So user should be able to save a story. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading because I found it useful. Because I found it useful is the benefit. I want to save a story I'm reading is the feature. And as a user, that's the role. That's the context for accessing that feature. And then, given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories and alter the icon to indicate success. If I describe this feature this way, I could write this on a post-it note and I can give it to any person in this room, and you already have a good idea of how to build this, what it's going to take to realize this feature. Well, I'm probably going to wrap like an anchor tag around the image, or I'm going to bind an on-click to that image, and then that's going to trigger a callback function that's going to send an AJAX request that on the back end, the database, it will associate the user ID and the story ID so that it's a saved story. And then I'll send back a success so that the front-end code knows to change the SRC of the image. Like, you already know how to build this. And this is just one feature. Imagine if you had this written out for all the features that you wanted to build. You would have a very clear path as to how to build your app. And it would save you a lot of the guesswork. It would save you that point where you're just staring at Sublime or VS Code or whatever you're coding in and going, how do I do this? It saves all of that. So, yeah, once again, we've got user story, we've got user scenario, and then the metadata, like I might link to the image icon that I want to use for saving the story. Maybe I'm going to link to the wireframe so that I know when I'm building the layout exactly where that icon is going to go. Maybe I'm going to link to the ERD that shows me the table schema of how I'm going to save the saved stories. All of that could be linked at the bottom, and I now have all the resources I need to be able to build this feature as a dev. So you're going to build out a whole set of user stories for all the features that you want to build. And typically, 14, 15 days, you're probably going to see somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 to 40 features that you're going to want to deliver. And a feature can be a relatively big, broad thing. Like, as a user, I would like to be able to provide my credentials and sign in because I want access to my content. Well, login is there's several moving parts to that. In order to do a login, you have to have a users table. In order to have the users table, you have to have figured out your ERD. You also have to have figured out like what kind of encryption am I going to do? Is it front end, back end? Like, where am I storing the session? Like, how is that going to work? There's a lot of decisions that go into that. But if you have 30, 40 user stories written out, one of them is going to jump out. One of them is going to be the one that really speaks to that big idea that you had at the beginning, the wouldn't it be cool if moment. And that's going to be your aha moment. That's going to be the moment when someone sees that feature in action that it tips the scales and answers that universal value question. That feature is going to be the one that's going to like sink that hook in and make them want to use your product. And out of all your user stories, put a little star in the corner of that one, because that's the one that is the contract that you as a dev team are now committed to delivering and knocking out of the park, because that is your killer feature. Find that, because that's the one that you're going to want to make sure works. That's the one you're going to want to spend some time highlighting when you demo your product. And when you are building out user stories, now we have the 5 most dangerous words in software development. Wouldn't it be cool if? Because when you're coming up with features that you could build in your app, any sentence that starts with this, I want to be able to give away the little dollar store squirt bottles. HR has told me that I can't. But literally, I would want to give one to each team so that when you're doing your feature planning, any sentence that starts with wouldn't it be cool if, somebody can just be like, no. Because this will kill you. Widow Winchester's mansion, if you know that story, constantly being added on to for 30, 40 years. No plan, no blueprints, just paying people to add features. We also call that McAfee Internet Security. But, sorry. This should be avoided. And the reason this should be avoided when you are coming up with features to build is the answer is always yes. And saying it a different way, or, hey, I've got a great idea, let's, no. Same thing. Don't do it. The reason this is dangerous is because it will dilute your focus. You start getting trapped into the idea of building features, not providing benefit. As you are speccing things out, as you are wireframing, you will have very key points, which I'll talk about, where you get to say, oh, is something missing? Do I need something extra? And that's when you get to ask the question of, am I delivering on my big idea? But just coming up with features of cool things that you think that you could build, the answer to this is always yes. With an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of money and no deadlines and no need to go get a job. Yeah, it would be really cool if you built all the things that you can come up with. But you're going to be here until you're 60 doing it. And we like you, but please get out, go get a job. So, feature complete. You have defined the full set of features that you're going to deliver, and you are confident that this set of features really defines your app, really quantifies, clarifies what it is your app does and why someone would want to use it. But most importantly, one of the things you have to recognize is that there is a very hard and fast deadline. And this is one of my first doses of realness in terms of how this relates to the rest of your dev career. Regardless of what you want to build, at the end of the day, you have to ship a product. There's a deadline. And that's the other reason wouldn't it be cool if will kill you. Because you will budget 50, 60 features that you want to build. You've got 15 days. In 15 days' time, you're going to be standing up here presenting to a crowd of your peers and your loved ones and your friends and your family and people that don't know you and people that just want to see cool stuff and employers and a whole collection of people. They want to see you ship something. They want to see you deliver a finished product. So that means over the next 15 days, one of the key things that you have to define for yourself is, what does done mean? What is good enough? And the reason this matters is because, yes, this code is going to get reviewed by employers. Please do not think that an employer is going to check out your repo and run your migrations and run your seed files and do the npm installs and fire up your product locally and play with it. Ain't nobody got time for that. Please do not go into the building of this thinking that all of your employers are going to be downloading and running your product locally. They're going to look at the code on GitHub. That's what they're going to do. So what you have to decide is, when you are doing the code, what is good enough? And that is both an individual decision and a group decision. And it matters because this is you putting your name on something and saying, this is what I can contribute to the industry as a whole. Now, one of the things that comes up when talking about this all the time is that fear of, well, I don't know enough yet to write code at that level. Okay, that's a fair fear, but also keep in mind that however good you are now, 2 weeks from now, you're going to be way better. 2 weeks ago, you hadn't learned WebSockets yet. Think of everything you've learned. You've learned an entire language since then. So however good you are worrying about yourself being right now, 2 weeks from now, you're going to be better. You have time to be able to refine and refactor and polish your code. Is it better to deliver 50 features that mostly work and have crappy code backing them up, or 40 features that when you look at the code, you kind of have that nod, smile, okay, I feel good about that moment. I will take 40 killer features that work great, look great, maybe even have some tests running behind them, over 50 features that kind of got thrown together, and the last one, the code was being written as you were walking up to the podium. Like, any day. You've heard me say it more than a few times that working code is worth more than pretty code, and that is true. But now is when you actually get to ask yourself that question of, what is good enough? What are you willing to put your name on as both your individual accomplishment and part of your group's accomplishment that you're willing to ship as your product? And that is a question that you are going to ask yourself, and you're going to have to refine the answer to from now until you make enough money that you don't have to code anymore. And trust me, if you ever find that point, please let me know, because I'll get a job there too. But this is a constant struggle for a dev. What is good enough? How far am I willing to take something and still be able to ship that product when I need to ship it? One of the first technical decisions you're going to want to make is, am I going to deploy my code? And this one is big for a couple of reasons. One is, when you're dealing with a bigger app, there's more steps, more process to being able to deploy it. The other reason it's a big deal is because if you don't make this decision early, it becomes a panic if you stick this on at the end. 2 days before demo day is not the time to go, oh, hey, I heard about this deployment thing. You want to do that? Sure, why not? Well, we're not done coding. Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. No, this is not something to let your arrogance take over. This will affect every other tech decision you're going to make, because you're now going to be dealing with different environments. You're going to have your development environment, and you're going to have your production environment. And you are going to have to make decisions that affect both of those environments. It is a good process to go through, because last time I checked, most places that hire developers to build and support products have deployed products. So this is something you may want to decide that you want to be familiar with. But to be clear, for your midterm project, you had two options. You had localhost 3000 and you had Heroku. Well, now there are many, many options available to you. One of the advanced lectures I typically do is about deploying to DigitalOcean, for example. But I also want to be super clear, we are not telling you you have to deploy your product. If you demo on localhost 3000, that is totally 100% fine. No one is going to judge you. No one is going to think you didn't build something good. No one's going to take away your cool points because you didn't deploy. I'm just saying, if you want to get that experience, it is an option, but we do not mandate it. We've already taken enough of your money. We're not going to tell you you have to spend more. So if you are going to do this, with the exception of Heroku, this is probably going to cost you money. I know, for example, AWS has a deal that you can sign up for like a student pack or something like that. And I think you get $1,000 of free credits for AWS or some ridiculous amount. Azure sometimes has promos going on. Google Cloud has $300 in free credit right now if you sign up. So that's that's another option, and that's equally as good of a platform as Amazon or Azure. Linode and DigitalOcean are very similar to each other. There are many options out there. If you choose to do this, you're dipping your toes into the DevOps pool. This isn't just about your code and your product anymore. It's about understanding the systems administration and what things have to be installed on the server for that to work. And, how do you get things to transfer across? Like, are you checking it out with Git? Are you sending across a zip file? Like, how are you going to transfer your code? It is a great experience, but it's a decision you want to make early. If you do deploy, you're probably going to want to buy a domain name. If you choose to do so, and again, we don't mandate it, you're probably going to spend between $4 and $35, depending on where you buy it from and what kind of domain you buy. If you buy one of the new ones that's like .ninja or .guru or something like that, they cost a little bit more. Name.com typically has a happy hour sale every day. I think it's from like 1 to 2 p.m. or 2 to 4 p.m. or something like that, where one of the random top-level domains like .museum or something like that, they'll sell for $4.99. So, check out name.com. I use a registrar called Mark Aria, which has the most ghetto website ever, but they're an awesome registrar. It is excellent experience to set up a domain name, to get it to point at your server, to get the name servers all configured, and it's incredibly rewarding. Please keep in mind, if you buy a domain name, it's not something that you just turn off when you're done. You own it for a year minimum. The other piece of advice I'm going to give you is that if you do choose to buy a domain name, when you're in the checkout process, there's going to be this little thing, no matter which registrar you're on, there's going to be this extra little thing that's going to ask you if you want to spend like another $9 to $11 to enable something called domain privacy. Do it. It's worth the money. Because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to get about 150 to 200 phone calls, emails, text messages, inviting you to take advantage of the quality app building services of a number of very respectable firms in Eastern Europe and South Asia. And they are incredibly well regarded, and they have references, and they are the most affordable option for getting your new digital property up and going. They'll even do your SEO for you on top of that, get you on the first page of Google. I literally had a guy call me at 2 o'clock in the morning one time, right after I had bought a domain name because I forgot to turn on domain privacy. I bought it on the plane. I was flying to London, so I bought the domain on the plane, and I forgot to take off domain privacy, and by the time I landed, I had 40 emails in my inbox inviting me to build the high quality WordPress, PHP, Drupal, Magento site that I needed. So just a tip, when you buy a domain, turn on domain privacy. Okay, so when it comes to the technical decisions that you're going to make, one of the first ones after deployment that I highly recommend, because you're not ready to code yet. Yes, Mish? How long does it take on average to go through deployment? If you understand the steps that you need to do, even at a big, broad brushstroke level, will probably take you 4 to 6 hours, to have it, the initial one, get everything go through, get it set up, understand what's going on, and have your app running that first time. It can say 4 hours to, half a day, roughly. If you don't understand the broad brushstrokes, you're probably thinking about a day and a half into it. So somewhere between 4 and, oh dear God. Rosie. Okay. Really good question. So how do you set yourself up for success? Basically, the two questions almost tie into each other. So how do you find out what you need to know, and then how do you actually get it done? Typically, deployment is one of those things that gets treated, like Dad's recipe for chili or something like that. It's kind of steps that are handed down from one person to another. A mentor situation is the best way, because you need someone to sit down and talk you through the big picture, and then for each one of those big picture steps, what are the individual steps to get it done? At the broadest brushstroke level, you need a server. You need some other place on the internet that this code is going to go that you can point a domain at. Then you need to make sure that the software is on the server to actually be able to run your product. So if you're building in Node, you need to have Node installed on that server. How do you do that? Which distribution of Linux is it on, or Windows, or whatever type of server it happens to be? How do you install Node on that? I need a database. Okay, well, how do I install the database on that? How do I configure that database for a brand new user? How do I transfer my code from my local machine to that remote machine? What's the best way to do that? What's the worst way to do that? What's something in between that I can wrap my brain around? And then, ideally, being able to easily understand and set up the series of commands that are going to transfer your code up, run all the commands that are necessary, like npm install, connects migrate latest, whatever needs to be done on the server side, and then getting your app started up so that you can actually go to the IP address, the domain, port, whatever it is, and access that app. That's the big broad brushstrokes. Inside of that is a whole bunch of individual steps. Like I said, it's typically something I do an advanced lecture on, and I'll be back next week, so hopefully I'll get to do that one for you. I haven't looked at the lecture schedule, so I don't know. But the other side to it is, like, the video of me doing that lecture before is on Compass, and if you grab, and this isn't me throwing Joel under the bus, because Joel's just terrible at deployments, and he admits it, but if you grab most any mentor like me or Nima or Carl or Sam or somebody like that, we've been through deployments before, and we'll happily sit down for like a half hour and walk you through the process. So, the mechanics of it don't have to be understood on day one. The decision to do it needs to be made on day one, if you're going to do it. The mechanics of it, I would advocate by the end of your first week, you should be starting to do, starting that process of building that habit. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So you're starting up that process of like continuous integration, continuous deployment. I think Carl talked about that with you guys when it came to testing, and it's just you're going to start finding out. The sooner you get it set up, then theoretically your whole team can start pushing to the live server and seeing things run, and allowing other people to be able to test your work. So yeah, I would typically start doing it by the end of the first week at the latest. Not something you want to start a couple days before you have to demo. Yes, 1 week from now, yes. Like next Wednesday, you should be deploying. So the next big decision is databases. Because if your data is your product, you need to know how you're storing your data. Pick one. This isn't even the greatest hits. And the thing is, for your midterm, it was easy. You were using Postgres, plain and simple. And that's what you've worked the most with, and it's probably what you feel the most comfortable with. Some of you may have liked Mongo when you played with it. Some of you may not have. Some of you may have read about other NoSQLs and are like, hey, that sounds cool. The cool thing about your final project is that you have the opportunity to play with new tech safely, because it isn't going to affect your employment. Neo4j is a graph database, not GraphQL, a graph database that stores data completely differently than either SQL or Mongo. It's a whole different world, graph databases. You've been on Amazon and you're looking up something and you get that people who like this also liked. That's a graph database query. Graph databases are used for finding the associations between things and the shortest path between stuff that is not directly connected. It's one of the ways, for example, that law enforcement finds suspects and connects evidence, because graph databases work on this concept of nodes and edges. A node is a piece of data, and an edge is anything that is a similarity it shares with any other piece of data in the database. And so then you can run queries that trace edges to get from one thing to another. It's a cool idea. It has great applications. It may not be the answer for everything, but if you wanted to play with something like that, now is the time to do it, because you have the safe space and it isn't going to affect your employment, positively or negatively. CouchDB is another fantastic NoSQL database. All of the queries in CouchDB are written as JavaScript functions. I think you know JavaScript, so it works pretty well. Redis is a key value store. There's other ones out there. There's one called CockroachDB, which is pretty good. Replicates very nicely. Not a joke. That's what it's designed to do. There's now cloud versions of MongoDB. It's called MongoDB Atlas. So it's a hosted version of MongoDB, so you don't even have to run it locally. You can just have your database in the cloud. Dad with his son walking across the field. The son looks up in the sky and he says, "Dad, what are clouds made of?" And the dad says, "Mostly Linux servers." Pick one. Seriously. It doesn't matter which one you pick. Try and make it a good choice for the type of data that you are going to have. And if you've done your user stories, you know what type of data you're going to have. You know how relational it's going to be. And what I advocate always is store your data the way you are going to query your data. If you are querying data that is, document structure, then use Mongo, use Couch. If you're querying data that is highly relational, lots of one-to-many relationships, then put it in SQL. If you're querying data that is completely disconnected from each other and you're trying to find correlations where they may not have existed before, use a graph database. What matters is that you are trying to make your best choice. You're not making this choice with senior level experience, and you're not expected to. But you're making a choice of, I need to get better with this technology. You're making a choice of, I would like to learn more about this technology. You're making a choice of, what's the worst that could happen? But pick one, and pick one soon, because this now influences other tech decisions you're going to make. The language you're going to code in doesn't impact which database you choose. The database you choose may impact which language you code in. It's an interesting, one-way relationship, because if you're going to use, for example, Mongo or Couch, you might want to tend towards JavaScript because the APIs for both of those are JavaScript in nature. So if you're going to use Postgres or SQLite, MySQL, Percona, MariaDB, Oracle, MS SQL, pick any flavor you want, then it really doesn't matter what you're going to code in, because people have been connecting programming languages to SQL for 35 years. Literally, pick one. But pick it and be confident in your choice. This is not an easy thing to change after about Saturday, Sunday. Once you pick one, and it doesn't matter if it's SQL or not, do an ERD. This is second in importance to your user stories. Your user stories are the single most important piece of planning you can do. Second is your ERD. You have to plan out what data you are going to store. If you don't, how do you start writing code against it? Do you just plan to sit down at VS Code and go, I'll figure it out? Please tell me no. That's just, no. You have to have a starting place for your schema. And you can go, well, Don, Mongo doesn't have a schema. It's NoSQL. It's schemaless. Yes, but you still have to plan what data you're going to collect. Because in order for you to fulfill those user stories, In order for you to show on the map where the ice cream trucks are that are near you, you have to be able to query that data out of the database somewhere. So, how are you going to store it? Make those decisions. This will change. Migrations happen. I know there's a bumper sticker that says something similar. But migrations happen, and that's okay, but you need a starting place. And this gets critical when you get to wireframing, because this is the data points that you have to put onto your page when you are actually building your app. And if you're trying to put something in a wireframe that doesn't exist here, you're magically creating data at that point. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. This process matters. When you're coming up with this process, remember your data models are your nouns. Doesn't matter whether you're in Mongo. Mongo still has collections. Doesn't matter whether you're in Couch. Couch has views, and they are named. You need to be able to solidify the definition of the main data models in your application. And you get your nouns from your user stories. As a user, noun. I want to save a story, noun, that I'm reading because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, noun, when I tap the icon to save the story, same noun, then save it to my saved stories, new noun. I have 3 data models coming out of this one user story. Now imagine if I had 40 user stories and I went through and I collated all of the nouns that I plan on using in my application. I now know all of the collections, tables, data models that I need to build in order to accurately represent the data in my application. And if I don't go through this process, then I'm going to call it, story, and somebody else is going to call it post, and somebody else is going to call it thing I submitted, and we're going to have confusion. This solidifies that process. Let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about languages and server frameworks. You're welcome. Pretty good so far. My computer updated this morning, so it like stopped 5 minutes before lecture, and I'm like, whew. Well, I already had that. This was just like a random software update, and it still took like 41 minutes to install. I started it like 10 after 8, and I'm like, I've got plenty of time. It normally takes like 20 minutes. 8:55. Yeah, I was sweating. Like, so I'm gonna be. Well, it's not like I don't know it off by heart. Oh yeah. Hmm. Oh, cool. Yeah. Firebase is awesome. No, that's not the reason to do it. Yeah. Yeah, but why would you need a database for that? Why can't you just use GPS on the phone? Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, ish. Yes, Firebase is in the cloud. It's a Google service. It runs on the cloud platform. Um, but depending on what it is you are deploying, like the thing is if all you're doing is pinging Firebase, that doesn't require an extra server to do it necessarily. You could do that directly from the app. Yeah. Like, you know where you live, right?
I always meet people like this at some website. So I meet people who come it's raining again. I'm like, did you do any research when you decided your travels? Like, you see pictures of I'm like, that's because no one would ever show what it always looks like.
Yeah.
It's not Hawaii.
Right. They took that on the one good day we had. Nope.
Even if it's like we're pretending to be a company. Let's say I was pretending to make an Apple product and I buy Apple.
That would be bad.
Right?
Yeah.
Putting it live would be a piss poor idea.
That would be a bad idea. Yeah.
So, because we had a quick little interview, and I was like, that was the first red flag in my head. Was like, we're pretending we're some company that we're not.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
Bad idea. Yeah.
Local 300.
Yeah. Literally. Yeah. Well, in the network. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could ngrok or something like that, totally. Or duck DNS or, one of those kind of things.
It's gonna be hard enough already. Right? It's like it's already gonna be hard enough. So I don't wanna push you too far away from Firebase. But if you come up with a reason for what Firebase would actually help your product, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like, oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So I decided on and
All right. Let's get back to it. Do I need to like ring a bell or something? Yeah. Do the grade school. Okay. So, when last we left off, we'd gotten here. You're still not ready to code. You still haven't done all the planning and the decisions that you need to do before you can code. And at this point, you're choosing a server framework. And really what you're asking yourself is, what language would I like to code in? You have options. And kind of like what I said with the databases, pick one. There's somebody that will help you with all of them. But the theme of the conversations that were going on over here during the break all centered around one key idea. You have the freedom to choose any technology you want. However, every time you choose a technology that you are not currently familiar with, you're going to have to go back to that set of user stories that you wrote for yourself, and you're now going to have to divide that set of user stories into things I can guarantee I can deliver and stretch goals. Ideally, you came out of your planning process with a few stretch goals already. You know, those lovely, if we get time, we will add this feature kind of things. But every time you bring in a new technology, you have to move things from the yes, I'm going to do this category into the stretch goals category. You have to sacrifice features for time to learn new tech. And so if you decide, for example, that you're going to build in Python, and you're going to learn the framework Django, and you're going to use CouchDB, and you're going to use a view engine like Handlebars or Slim that you've never used before, and you're going to use, like, I don't know, some different WebSocket library or some different Ajax library that you've never touched before. Oh, you know what? Your front end is going to be in Ember, not React. Well, you're going to deliver about 5 features. It's going to be a midterm project full of a whole bunch of new tech, but you're going to be delivering something at the scale of a midterm project because you're going to spend the next 2 weeks learning new technology. So you have to be conscious of what the compromise is. There is a trade-off when you bring in new technology. Admittedly, a week ago, you didn't know Rails. Now you do. So it doesn't take long. Okay, you do. I didn't say you liked Rails. I just said you knew Rails. There's a very big difference. You accomplished something in Rails. I love you guys. I'm going to miss you guys. That's it. None of you are allowed to graduate. Davey, this whole cohort's rolling back. Okay. So yeah, Node and Ruby are what you have been exposed to so far. Node is obviously your happy place, clearly. But there are compelling reasons for choosing other languages. But once again, don't think that it's going to affect your employability. You don't get a gold star from an employer because you took on a harder task and delivered a lesser product. That's not what's going to make the difference. If you take on another technology and you deliver a product that is just as good, if not better, than everybody else's, that gets you the gold star. Not because you took on the new technology, because you delivered the quality product. So if you're going to pick a new technology, even if you're going to go the direction of React Native, which I've heard some rumblings about, fantastic. Do it for the right reasons. Do it because that's going to deliver a better product experience. That's going to give you access to, you know, certain device features that a mobile website wouldn't, for example. That's the reason to pick that kind of technology. Picking Java, for example, well, maybe there's a machine learning thing or a image recognition thing, that library that only works in Java. And you want to use that thing because you know it's going to do what you want to do. Well, then that's now a compelling reason to pick that tech. Not because you want to put a cape on and say, I'm a hero, I learned a new language. That's not the reason. Once you pick your language, by the way, please make sure it's a decision the whole team is on board with. You don't get to code in PHP while everybody else is in Node, as an example. It doesn't work that way. So make sure it's a decision the whole team is on board with, and then pick the language first, and then go research what are the popular frameworks in that language. Look up the pros and cons. Node, for example, you know Express. Express is one of only about I don't know, 5,000 other frameworks that are out there for Node. There are ones that are arguably more popular than Express. There's Happy, there's Meteor, there's Derby, there's Strong Loop, there's Sales.js, there's a whole bunch of other ones. Koa is the other one. Koa is the grown-up version of Express, both written by the same guy, by the way. Koa is Express with ES6 kind of built in. So figure out what you want to work in and make that decision because it gives you the ability to build a better product. Not because, oh, this looks cool. Having seen a title of a tutorial that's like, build really cool things with this framework is not a reason to pick it. Having gone through the tutorial and saying, yes, we can build what we want to build and have it work really well, that's a reason to pick it. And that's going to be the decision you're going to make anytime you have to choose a technology in building a product from now until the heat death of the universe. Pick it because it's the right decision for the product, not because you want to earn the merit badge for having built something with Meteor. So, you've picked a database, you've decided whether or not you're going to deploy, you've done your ERD so you know what data is going to be stored. You have picked a language to code in. You have picked a framework to give some architecture to your application. You are in a very good place at this point, but you are not ready to code yet because you need to think about your routes. These absolutely have to be planned out before you start coding because otherwise you will miss something, guaranteed. And especially with where you are now, having had some familiarity with front-end frameworks, you have to decide what is managing your routes. Is it something on the front end, like React Router? Or is it something on the back end, like Express or Rails or something else? You can't really have both. Because if you're doing a front-end app, like a single-page application, using React or React Native or Ember or Angular or Vue or any of those other libraries, your backend is mostly an API. You're still going to need routes, but these aren't routes that are rendering views. These are routes that are serving up data. Think about Tweeter, for example. You had routes in Tweeter, but those routes were just for serving up JSON. It wasn't really for rendering that page. The code on the front end rendered the page. React, if you're building a React app, React Router is awesome. It's a fantastic library, and you will have routes, but they will only exist in the browser. They will not be routes where a request is being sent to the server and a response is coming back with the data. The route simply decides which React component is going to be shown at any given point. So it allows you to swap out entire page components in React. It's a really cool thing. Yeah, like, and it's awesome, and it's easy to set up. Like, getting skills with React Router takes like 2 hours. So that's an option if you want to have different URLs in your browser bar. If you want to have that link load a new page kind of dynamic going on in your application, then React Router is 100% the way to go. But you have to decide that before you start trying to build it. You don't build it and build a whole bunch of different individual pages and then go, oh, this would be easier with React Router, and then go back and rebuild everything. That's a waste of your time. Make the decision ahead of time. Front load your planning so that you only have to build it once. If you're going to be having back-end routes, whether it's an API, whether it's actually a traditional HTTP app, which is totally fine, by the way, you would be best served by using RESTful conventions. The other option is you can play with a new technology called GraphQL, which is one route. Everything goes through one route / GraphQL. And that's all you ever have to build is one route. And everything goes through that. And it gets rid of REST completely and is a whole different way of being able to send and receive data. But if you want to choose GraphQL, pick up some features from your I'm going to deliver this as my MVP and move them over to stretch goals. because you're going to have to take time as a team to learn that new technology. If models are nouns, routes are verbs. Routes are the actions that we take on our data. So we have to plan them out. And the really cool thing is we can go back to our user stories. It's why these are so critical. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading, /stories/ID, because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, /stories/ID, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories, /stories/ID/save. I know 2 routes that I'm going to have. That was off of 1 user story. Imagine if I go through my full stack of 30 or 40 user stories, and I collate out the list of all the routes I'm going to need. And I know that /stories/ID is a get route, and /stories/ID/save, arguably put or post. I can make an argument for either one. So I now know the full route, the verb and the path that I'm going to need to deliver the feature described in this user story. If I go through all my user stories and I build out that list of routes that I need to build now, guess what I have? I have a to-do list of all the tasks as a developer that need to be done. Because if you think about building an application, especially on the back end, this is your back end to-do list, is the list of routes. And then each one of those routes is going to inform the database queries that are going to have to be run. And those database queries may require migrations, may require some updates to schema. But now you have that list that you can turn around and dump into something like Trello, and it's your to-do list for what has to be done so that all these user stories can be fulfilled. You've got an info section down at the bottom. Great place to put what verb is going to be used and what routes, what the path is going to be for the users, for the routes that satisfy this user story. Really? Did the internet just die? No. Okay. There we go. Wireframing. So wireframing, this section of what needs to be done for planning has 3 parts. Wireframing, storyboarding, and design. You could lump it all under the heading of design, but typically wireframing is going to come first, typically, because you're not ready to code yet. The biggest reason you're not ready to code yet is you don't know what your app's going to look like. You can't possibly code anything on the front end until you have designed the front end. And please don't ever fall into the trap of building some dummy HTML page and attempt to justify it by saying, well, I'm testing the data. Have you heard of the command line? That's where you test data. You don't need to build a fake front end to test that data works. Data works on the command line just as well as it does on, when you actually render it in the browser. And if you're worried about rendering something in the browser, that's what the console's for, in the browser. Do it there. Don't bother spending time building something that you're just going to have to throw away and rebuild later on. So, what wireframing is, it is data hierarchy. It is navigation. It is proportion. It is deciding where on the page data is going to go. Data could be images. Data could be headlines or blog posts or social media links or counts of things. Data is all of those data points that you decided to put into your ERD. If it's not in your ERD, it can't go on this page. And if you get to this point and realize that there is something critical missing, you have to do the wouldn't it be cool if test. Am I trying to invent a new feature just because I have some white space? Or is this something that is actually missing in my application that I need in order to deliver my MVP? And if the answer to the second question is yes, then you're not in wouldn't it be cool if territory. There's no you're okay. Yeah. No, but those represent, the thing is, those are pointing to the like the key user stories, the key features that you're delivering. If anything, your navigation is kind of a top-level list of features you are delivering. And I'm willing to bet that services in portfolio actually represent tables in the database. Or, reference something that you are storing in the database. Yeah. So the navigation also matters because the navigation, since we're talking about it, points out the order in which you want people to consume your data. Go look at the navigation on any website that you regularly go to. It could be IMDb, it could be, your stock, your bank website, it could be Lighthouse. The order of the navigation is the order the site designer intends for you to progress through that site. That's always intentional. And if it's not intentional and you feel like it's janky and doesn't make sense, then that's someone who didn't do a good job of planning their site. But professional sites, the order of the navigation is intentional. There's a deliberateness to it. So you're gonna lay out things, and literally you're not gonna get any more fine-grained than this big box that says image, or the other thing is you'll typically see an X in it for that being an image. Doesn't matter what image is going to go there. You're just representing this space will be consumed by an image. This space will be consumed by a headline. This is not about lorem ipsum text, although you can use it if you want. Lorem ipsum is great because it resembles the flow of regular text. So you don't have to make up things. You can just go to meettheipsums.com and grab one of the generators from there. There's some that are absolutely hilarious. There are some that are admittedly not safe for work, so be smart. The one from Bob's Burgers is just horrible and awesome. But you're going to decide the proportion of the screen that is taken up by different things, and this should be inferred from your data hierarchy. You as a dev know what data points are most important on this page. Things like the title of the page, like the main title for what that page is. That's probably you're going to want to plan the space for that to be there. Something like a social media link, tiny, small at the bottom. But you need to plan where it's going to go. Once you get done with a wireframe, you want to do like a smell test, sanity test. You want to look over that from corner to corner, and you want to ask yourself, do I have the data planned out to satisfy everything I've put on this page? Am I missing anything that is critical to the function of my app? And then ask yourself, like, have I, if I was looking at this page, would I feel uncomfortable? Is there, please don't put everything in one big column in the center. That's a noob move. Don't do that. Centering is not actually as lovely as you think it is. And when you center everything, it loses its effect. So yeah, ask yourself, like, if I was the user and I saw this page, would I be comfortable looking at it? Don't be afraid of white space. White space is okay. Just because there's white space does not mean you have to invent something new. If anything, be willing to leave space around stuff so that you can emphasize where certain key points are. Great wireframes demonstrate the UI and the UX. Great wireframes clearly indicate what is going to happen and how the user should interact with that content. For example, here, this would be for, like a flight app. And we've got fly out and fly back right in the middle there, and they've got little calendars next to them. What do you think is going to happen when I tap on those? I'm going to see a calendar. You can plan that ahead of time. The other thing that you want to do with your wireframes is anything that is going to change the view of that screen. So like a modal coming up, a fly out thing, a calendar coming up when you click on that. You want to do a version of the wireframe that shows that page, and then you want to do a version of the wireframe that shows that page with that interaction clearly happening. If you're going to have a drop-down menu, How far is that drop down going to go? What is it going to cover up? Is that going to be a problem? Plan that ahead of time. Those are the kinds of UI bugs that people start panicking, trying to fix the day before they're going to demo, and they end up making bad choices because they're in panic mode. If you plan out what it's going to look like ahead of time, then you build it to spec the first time. Save yourself the grief. Like, I had hair when I started doing web development. So the other thing is, the smell test is, does this fulfill the user story that I planned? You should be able to go back to your user stories and connect a wireframe to every single one of them. And if you have user stories left over that don't have wireframes, you have to ask yourself the question, am I done wireframing? And if you have wireframes left over that don't have user stories connected, did you go too far? Is there something there that you need that you can now ask yourself, oh crap, I'm clearly missing having spec'd out this feature? Now is the time to figure that out, not next Saturday. Save yourself the grief. This is an example of what not to do. This is a terrible wireframe. That being said, it utilizes practically every web interaction that we could possibly have all in one page. There's a breadcrumb, there's an image, there's text, there's a video, there's buttons, there's a sign-up form, there's a 5-star rating, there's social sharing, there's a carousel, there's a ticker, like a marquee. This is what happens when you try and fill up white space because you're afraid of leaving any extra space on your page. Please just don't do this. Like, this is bad. Storyboarding is part of the design process. You're not ready to code yet, and you need to storyboard. Now, storyboarding, if you've never done it before, is something you're probably far more comfortable with than you think. Quick show of hands. Anybody never read Dilbert? So you've seen a storyboard. Dilbert is a storyboard. It's a 3-panel cartoon. And it shows 3 specific scenes in a storyline, and your brain infers the space in between them. That's what you want to do with your pages on your app. Treat them like sticky notes. Figure out what order things need to go in, and then figure out what you're going to click on, what you're going to do on this page that will bring you to this page and then bring you to the next page. Because if you figure that out ahead of time, it is a heck of a lot easier than having to go back and rewrite click handlers or redo the href on a whole bunch of anchor links. It's a pain in the ass when you have to do that, and inevitably you forget one. Don't put yourself in that position. Plan it out correctly ahead of time. Because at this point, it's a whole lot easier to just take post-it notes and move them around. Do your wireframing, make it all nice and fancy in some tool. You can even go to like something like InVision or Mockingbird and do a whole full-color mock-up if you really want to. But then draw little post-it notes and go to the window and figure out what order they're supposed to be in. Because you don't need all the detail in the post-it note. You just need to know which wireframe is which. Figure out the right order for them to go in, and then link between them. Now you know what to build when you're actually going to build it. The storyboarding will give you that. That then can determine the order of your navigation as well. So then we get to the design portion. Now, some people do start with design. The design informs the wireframe, and then you do the storyboarding afterwards. Generally, storyboarding is always going to come close to last. But design is the visual aesthetic of it. So, great quote, doing development without a design is like doing origami blindfolded. Yes, you will get folded paper. It will not be a pretty crane. The reason this is a good quote for this situation is because if you don't have a wireframe and you don't know what the design of your app is going to be, you can't start writing layout code. Otherwise, you have no idea what the hell you're building, plain and simple. So do this planning work ahead of time. I know that as a dev, our fingers itch to get hands on keys. That's how we solve problems, is by typing. But you have to know what it is you're going to type. And I would much rather build something once than 6 times. Just because I have extra time to spend between now and 2 weeks from Thursday doesn't mean I want to spend that time angrily rebuilding something because it was wrong the first 4 times. So the design matters. The color theory matters. There's a reason social media sites are blue, financial sites are green, food sites are red or yellow. You know, there's a reason for that. There's conscious choice behind that. There's a reason that Arial is, you know, used pretty much everywhere for casual text and Times New Roman for more formal or business or legal text. The typography matters. The layout, like whether it's a 2-column, 3-column layout, 1-column layout, whether there's a sidebar, whether there's a nav bar, all of those things, yes, 100% do matter. But there's a great big however. Literally, there's a great big however right there. We're training you to be devs, not designers. You're not being judged on the design of your app. You're being judged on how it functions. So don't let this be the thing that slows you down. Use resources like Dribbble, Folio Focus, Smashing Magazine, Behance. Honestly, go grab a WordPress theme and swap out the PHP for EJS. You now have your design. There's no copyright police that are going to kick down the blue doors and arrest you on demo day because you made your site look like somebody else. 90% of the web is plagiarized for a reason. Design patterns are the things that worked for other sites and get copied into new places. So don't feel like you have to come up with some brand new Emily Carr graduate-worthy, you know, design innovation. Worry about getting something on the screen. If you're stuck and you don't know what your layout should look like, go look at 3 other apps that are in the same category as your app and look at what they did. Model it after them. Like I said, there are no copyright police that are going to come and put you in cuffs. Yeah. So UI frameworks can be contentious at this point, especially now that we have things like Flexbox and CSS Grid, because the argument is, do I need them? And even if I do decide that I need them, the question really becomes, which one do I need? Because there are so many. Like, they're, again, not even close to the greatest hits. Stuff like Bootstrap, Foundation, Bourbon, Black Hole, Groundwork, Pure, all of these have a whole set of UI components. Things like modals and drop-down menus and button stylings and form stylings. They've done all that work for you. So all you have to do is drop the CSS in, use the markup that they recommend, and it just works. And it saves you time. But the cool thing is, because you do have 15 days, you do have the luxury of being able to do a lot of the CSS yourself. And that may be something that you want to take on. Because it is rewarding when you get it right. So you may not even need one of these. And especially if you're using one of these for the layout, like using the grid framework as a layout, well, if you are learning Flexbox or CSS Grid and you're going to go down that road, then you don't need one of these at all. Bulma is Flexbox based, I will say that. The new version of Bootstrap, Bootstrap 4, is Flexbox based. So, you know, even these are starting to migrate to the newer layout engines. Don't pick one of these just because you have to. We told you to use Bootstrap or Foundation in your midterm because you needed experience with them. But don't think that you have to pick one of these. But if you don't want to have to code all those UI elements for yourself, you're probably going to want one of these. If it does help, Bourbon and Black Hole are both SaaS-based, so you can just import modules as you need them. So that can also be helpful. So separate from UI frameworks is front-end frameworks, meaning JavaScript. So this is not a conversation that we could have during the midterms because you hadn't learned any of them yet. The only thing close to a front-end framework you had used was jQuery for Tweeter, and jQuery is not a framework. So there's a lot of them. You know, you've learned React. Vue, really cool. We've had groups use Vue before. We've had groups use Ember before. We've had groups use Angular before. Aurelia, Meteor, Inferno, there's a whole bunch of them. And they're all good. and you know React, and you've seen the cool things that React does, and there's a natural urge to go back to what you know. But I will challenge you on why you are choosing that technology. Are you choosing it because you think you have to in order to get respect from employers? Well, the answer to that's no. You can build anything that you can do in React, you can do with jQuery, guaranteed. Might take more code, but anything you can do in React, you can do in jQuery or with vanilla.js. In fact, you might want to put on the cape and say that the accomplishment is, I've done all of that, all with vanilla.js. Because at the end of the day, every single one of these is written in JavaScript. There's no extra magic being brought in. So it's just JavaScript. It's not going to make you more employable. It's not going to make you earn extra cool points. The only reason is because it's relevant to the project. Similar to the other tech choices that I talked about, if you're going to pick one of these, pick it because it's going to improve the user experience, the data delivery, the deployment. Like, you know, maybe you're picking React Native because you want it to be on the phone. Maybe you are picking Vue because you want that type of experience for the user. Keep in mind, if you use a front-end framework, your project structure will change. Your back-end will be primarily a RESTful API. And that's by necessity. And that all of your view rendering is going to happen on the front end. At most, your back-end might serve up the initial page that triggers this library getting started. But if you're going to pick one of these, do it for the right reasons. Don't think that it's going to impact your employability. It doesn't. Now, we've talked about a lot of tech choices. And I've painted the scenario of Python and Ember and CouchDB and some new WebSocket library and, you know, different deployments. We have seen groups implode very quickly because they have been unnecessarily ambitious. And I don't want to dissuade you from being ambitious. I want you to just do so with open eyes. Because otherwise, this is where you're going to be. Don't do things just because you think that you have to. Pick it because, based on everything you've learned so far, it feels like the right choice. And then you won't feel like this. This should be a fun experience. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of work, but it should be a fun experience. Don't put yourself in the position where, you know, this is how you feel working on your project every day. We've actually had students burn out from doing their final project because they took on so much. So yeah, be mindful. I got to talk about Git. So you remember week 1, day 1, about 16 million years ago? You remember talking about it for the midterms and all the fun you had learning to collaborate with Git on your midterms? Remember how we kind of told you on day 1 that this is a skill that employers are going to expect you to have, and that was the point to start practicing those skills, because the sooner they became a habit, the easier they were going to be? Probably reference something like that in the midterms as well. There was that activity that you had to do before the day the midterm started about collaborating with Git. Now, I'm going to say that I'm just personally sure that all of you have been immaculate with your Git workflow since then, having learned those deep, important lessons. And all of you branch beautifully, and you never have conflicts. And if I was to go look back at the Git commit histories of Chatty or Jungle, I would see beautiful branches and merges and pushes, and I would weep with joy. Just in case, I'm going to introduce something new to you that might make it a bit easier for you, and it's something that you're probably going to want to learn. So everything we've used up to this point is called the Git workflow. There is a separate version called the GitHub workflow, and this is the same workflow that is used in open source contribution. So the way it works instead of having one central repo that there are collaborators that all push to, each one of you has your own fork of the repository. And you assign someone to be the gatekeeper. And so I'm going to pick on Zoe and Rosie because they're right here in front. So let's say we're working on a project together. And let's say Zoe starts off and sets up the initial repo. Rosie and I would fork it. We would each have our own copy. And as we are coding, as we are developing, we're using the right workflow. We're putting all of our code into branches, committing to those branches, merging them to master when they work, then pushing that up to our repositories. At the point where we need to collaborate as a team and share code, let's say Zoe starts off as the gatekeeper. What Rosie and I would do when we finish a feature is we would go to Zoe's repository and we would make a pull request. So we're requesting that she pull from our repository into hers. And that is how open source contribution works. If I was going to go contribute to Express, I would make a fork of Express. I would do my code, commit it to my master, and make a pull request to their master. And then at the point where that happens, because you have some extra time as a team, you have a cool opportunity. You get to code review each other. You get to be professional. You get to be adults. I know, I hate asking people to do that. But you get to respectfully look at the work, go back to that conversation I had earlier about what is good enough, what is done, and look at what has been contributed, and as a group decide, hey, we like this, let's merge it into the main product now. And maybe Zoe serves as the gatekeeper for a few days, and then Rosie takes over, and so then we would make pull requests against Rosie's repository. Then a few days later, it's me, and they're making pull requests against mine. But every time the pull request, the PR comes in, we can stop, take 10 minutes, look at the code, look at what's been submitted, like pair program group code review, and decide, does this satisfy what needs to be done? Are there cool things in there that the other two of us can learn from? Are there recommendations we can make? Do we see any obvious bugs? Because if we do that, and we catch things before they make it into the main product, that's less debugging we have to do later on. And if I find a bug and I push back on Rosie's code, she shouldn't be hating me at that point, because I'm not judging Rosie. I'm judging, oh, hey, we found a bug here. Let's get that fixed before we merge that in. I'm not telling Rosie she's a bad coder. I'm saying, oh, we caught something here before it became a problem in our app. That's being professional. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about not bringing code into the product that isn't going to do what we need it to do. It's not even calling it bad code. It could be awesome code. There could just be some edge case that maybe I thought of or maybe Zoe thought of that she didn't. That's all there is. It's just making sure that the quality of your product is where you want it to be for when you demo it. Because you don't want to have to demo around bugs. That sucks. I advocate for trying this out because this is also internally how a lot of companies do their development. Like internally with like Compass and other tools that we have, like the Lighthouse website and stuff, this is how we do our development internally because it's the open source workflow. So this is a process you need to know. And it gives you the opportunity to treat each other professionally, do code review, and establish what the quality of your product is that you want as a team. And please, if now 7.5 weeks in, you have any affection left in your heart for me whatsoever, please do not code on master. Ever again. Ever. Just don't. The thing is, there's always the exception. Oh, I missed a comma. Let me just add that. Yeah, there's always an exception to the rule. But it's about the principle of it rather than the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. doing your work and keeping that good Git workflow of having your feature development and bug fixes in branches helps you to really clarify that distinction between production code and development code. It allows you to track the individual pieces of your development separate from the overall progression of your application. That's something you should be doing as a pro. Just build the habit. Because literally, this is your last chance to build these good habits. You got 2 weeks left. If you haven't been building good Git habits now, please. Just please. Okay, good news. You're almost ready to code. You've done almost all the planning you need to do. In fact, the planning part really is done. The scaffolding is where you start to set up your dev environment, the environment in which you're going to build your application. Absolutely should be done pair programmed as a team. Set up your Git repository. Either add collaborators or make forks. Download and install all the resources you're going to need. Because one of the things I didn't talk about earlier is when you are picking a language, one of the things that might inform that is which libraries you might need. Whether they're NPM libraries, whether they're Ruby gems, whether they are Python pip libraries, PHP Composer libraries, Java Beans, like whatever it happens to be, there's going to be libraries that you're going to need to facilitate your application. Download them, install them, npm install, yarn add, whatever it is you're going to do. Get them in there. If you're bringing in libraries like frameworks like Bootstrap or Foundation, use CDN links. Don't worry about downloading some copy of it from the internet. Just use the CDN link because it's probably going to be cached. And then, most critically, the one place I see teams make this mistake over and over again, get everything installed, and then make sure that you can run npm start or Rails S and actually get the initial welcome page, hello world page to load. Because if you can't, you are not ready to start coding. You have a broken environment. You know, if you couldn't boot your computer, would you start coding your app? No. Well, I'm going to do it on Notepad for now. Well, when are you going to fix the other problem? I don't know. I'll get around to it. Can't operate that way. Set up your dev environment, get it clean, and get it working before you start building anything. Because since you're doing this process as a team, you get to fix any problems that come up. You know what to do to get that library to install. You know what to do to set up that database. You know what to do to configure that user or do the security key or whatever it happens to be. You will know that ahead of time. Because whatever you do on the first computer, guaranteed, you're going to have to replicate it on all the other members of the team's computers. So push the app to GitHub so everybody can clone or fork or do PRs back to their own repos, whatever it is you're going to do. And then go through that process, everybody individually. Nobody starts coding until everybody can get the initial page to load. That's when you have a clean dev environment, a good base from which to build. Then you get to pick team responsibilities. Then you get to pick who's going to work on what. And you've probably got some ideas already. You're practically ready to code. You're waiting to be told, hey, here's what each person's going to work on. And you want that silver bullet recipe. You want to be told this is the right way to divide up tasks to make the most impact. And I can't do that. There is no right way. I'd love to be able to tell you I have the right method, the right formula, carry the 2, add a 1 here, use somebody's name twice, spin around 3 times under the moonlight. Like, there is no ritual that you can follow that gives you the right way to divide tasks, because every team and every project are different. Even the same team working on different products will have different tasks. There are many different types of responsibilities that you could have. Because you're going to have to worry about front end, you're going to have to worry about back end, you're going to have to worry about database, you're going to have to worry about client-side JS, back-end JS maybe. Maybe you want to divide things up by feature and each person just takes a user story and says, I'm building this. And so you're responsible for everything to make that user story work. Maybe you're going to do everything pair programmed. That worked for a lot of you in the midterms. It's not a bad thing. You're not losing time by pair programming because you go faster pair programmed than you do individually. 2 heads are better than 1 for solving a problem. You've got to deal with migrations. Didn't even cover whether or not you are going to do it responsively. Does that mean you need a whole new set of wireframes for desktop and mobile? If so, that's got to be taken care of, and the actual media queries to make that happen are going to have to be taken care of. Maybe one person's going to own the deployment. Ultimately, you're going to pick whatever works for your team. Now, you have a unique opportunity here because you have 2 weeks to focus on something. You're done with the curriculum. You've learned front-end development, back-end development. You've learned CSS. You've learned database queries. You've learned a whole bunch of stuff. And every single person in this room has varying levels of strengths and weaknesses in every one of those categories. Now is the opportunity for you to go to your team and say, I really want to work on X. I don't feel strong with it. I need to graduate with better skills in that. Can I own that piece of the project? Doesn't mean that you're the only person that's going to work on it. It means you're owning it. You are now accountable for that being delivered. You may need help from other people. You may get 27 mentor requests, mentor assistances, just to get the first piece of it done, and that's okay. But what matters is that you are advocating for yourself and for your own skill development. You have the opportunity to get your team to support you in making sure that you come out of this course with the skills you need in all the areas that you want to have them. And I encourage teams to be supportive of that. If somebody on your team says, you know what, I suck at CSS, I'm going to do it so that I get better at it. I'm going to need help from you guys, but I'm going to own the most of the CSS. Most people will go, fine, I don't want to do it. Maybe it's the database queries, maybe it's the migrations, maybe it's actually doing deployment because it scares the living hell out of you right now. Take the opportunity to own the piece that scares you, because you've only got 2 weeks left in the boot camp. You've only got 2 weeks of mentorship left. What do you want to have, how comfortable do you want to be with all these things in 2 weeks' time when you are standing up and presenting yourself to an employer? Take the time, invest the time, and make good decisions. You're not going to hurt the team because you currently don't feel strong at CSS. You got 2 weeks. 2 weeks in boot camp time is like a semester of university. You've got the time. Take the time. As a team, decide how you're going to divide things up. And then, congratulations. Now you are ready to code. Because now you know that when each person on the team sits down at their computer and puts hands on keys, you have a straight, clear, happy path to go from here's what I need to build to it being built. You will minimize, if you follow this method, I can guarantee you will minimize the amount of bugs you're going to have. You will minimize the amount of conflicts you're going to have. You will minimize the number of times that you have to rebuild something because it didn't match the team's vision. And overall, you're going to be happier with your progress because you're going to feel in control of the process. And that matters. When you're doing front-end work, start with a static page. Literally build index.html in Sublime first. Just make your head, make your body, put the CSS files in there, load in whatever I wouldn't even worry about JavaScript files, honestly, at this point. Just worry about building HTML and CSS. Get your layout to work this way before you ever worry about it working in your application. Because if it doesn't work here, it's not going to work when you turn it into EJS or ERB. Jay? Yes. Because the thing is, you're still defining components. And once you get what the layout is supposed to be, like what markup is necessary, worst case scenario, you're just copying it out, wrapping a div around it. Yeah, so even React-based, I would still do this. One of the key pieces here is getting the CSS for your layout to work, especially if you're starting to take on something like Flexbox or CSS Grid. Get it to work here first. It's too hard to take on that new technology and a dynamic layout, like with components and everything else. Get it to work here first. Decide on what you're going to name your classes and IDs. I will always, always insist that you do not need as many IDs as you think you do. This is a team process for how these get named, because you may be doing the CSS, but somebody else may be doing, the selectors that are binding to events and stuff like that. So make sure the naming of things makes sense. Talk to your team when you are deciding this. Use placeholders like Phil Murray and Ipsum generators. Placekitten.com, placehold.it. Whatever you want to use, just use placeholders. Don't worry about having to use real data. All you need is an image of the right dimensions to go in there. And these are free. Like, that's the even best part about it. You can use these and get free placeholders for text or images, and that way you can make sure that your layout works the way you want. And on that note, don't fall into confirmation bias. As humans, as devs, we have a huge confirmation bias. We only want to see our things work with good data. Use bad data. You've allocated, say 600 pixels across the page for your title. What happens if the title is yes? How does that affect your layout? Does anything break? What if your title is like 25 words long? How does that affect the layout? Does it wrap properly? Fix those bugs with CSS now, so that when people are starting to add content in, or when you're pulling stuff in from an API, it doesn't break. There are great properties in CSS that you can use for word wrapping, for truncation, for a whole bunch of different things that will allow you to manage how the element will behave when content overflows it. There's even an overflow property. Imagine that. Use it. Fix that stuff now so that it's not a UI bug the day before you're going to deploy. When you get to the back end, always, always, always start with your data models. If you can't query your data, you can't deploy an app. Plain and simple. If your app is CRUD or bread in nature, well, you have to make sure you can read, insert, browse, add, delete. Like, if you can't do those things, it's not going to work in the app itself if you can't do it in the command line. If you need callbacks and validations, whether those are database constraints, whether those are, tests on the front end or the back end before data is submitted. By the way, always test your data on the front end and the back end. It's a security reason. Decide on that stuff first. That's not something you go back later and go, oh, I guess we should keep them from like uploading, a 1,000,000 meg file. Make sure it works in the command line before trying to make it work in your app. Make sure you set your alarm for 9 o'clock. Morning. I went ahead and started without you. I hope you don't mind. Now, I was born in the morning. It wasn't this morning. Was there a cataclysmic snowfall in some part of Vancouver that caused just one bus to be 2 hours late? Okay, thank you. Honesty takes you a lot further than trying to BS me. Make sure your code, especially when you're doing database queries, run it in the REPL first. You can run the node REPL, load in your connects config, and test your queries. That is going to make sure that you know how to query, you know what the promise-based is going to be, you know what the callback is going to be. You can accommodate for all of that stuff and do the testing and get the code just right. Do the right selects, the right inserts, the right joins. You can figure all of that out from the REPL before you're ever trying to get it to work dynamically in the app. This will save you a lot of time. Go back to the REPL. It is your sandbox. I know senior devs who do 90% of their coding in the REPL. They finally get a version that works, and that gets brought into the main app, and they're like, okay, I'm done, committed, pushed. They'll do 90% of their coding there, because this is where you iterate and tweak and just being able to go up and change one thing and run the query again, go up, change one thing, as opposed to having to edit the file, save the file, wait for Webpack to recompile, come over here, hit the button, put the thing in the, hit submit, blah, blah, oh, okay, it doesn't work. Run it in the REPL. Save yourself that grief. It's the database equivalent of pixel pushing at that point. Code atomically. We've been telling you for 7.5 weeks to write good code. Just because you're working on a bigger app does not give you a license to write bad code. This is where code review really helps. Being able to have somebody else that you respect objectively look at your code and go, you know what, that method's getting kind of big. Could we maybe break this section out into its own function, or maybe break this up into a couple of steps? Gives you the opportunity to get rid of that tunnel vision that you've had of just trying to get it to work and go, oh wow, you're right. You know what? I can see how to make this work. And then you get to impress your colleagues by stepping up your game. Code atomically, refactor, break things down. Single responsibility principle. Make sure your functions are just doing one thing. Watch out for the side effects. These are all things that you have learned to do over the past 7 weeks. And then we get to this. This is the project killer right here. Yeah. This is the reason that teams have problems, not the tech. It's never the tech. Teams don't argue about database queries. Teams don't argue about, oh, we should have used a div tag there instead of a section. That's not what causes arguments. What causes arguments is broken promises and missed expectations. Because as humans, we want to feel good. We want other people to think that we are good, so we will tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Communication solves this problem. There are many tools out there. Slack is an easy choice because you're already in a Slack network. Make your own Slack group. They're free. Telegram, WhatsApp, Hangouts, Skype, iMessage, Signal, don't care. Doesn't matter. What matters is that as a team, you pick one and commit to it. It's literally the same thing I said with databases. It's literally the same thing I said with picking a language. Pick one and stick to it. Trello also is a communication tool. And if you didn't bring in a project management tool to your midterm because you only had 5 days to do it, please, please, I beseech you, do it now. This is going to matter. If you don't know how to use Trello or you're not comfortable with it, please come see me and I will give you the 10-minute lesson on how to use Trello. Because Slack is about communicating the, hey, did you push? Oh, hey, what time are you going to be here? Oh, well, sorry guys, I overslept. I'm going to be in a little bit late. Setting that communication up and building that kind of messaging, that's what Slack is for. Trello is for the task of building the login page is assigned to Brennan. And Brennan is currently, he's got it in his I'm doing this column, and he's flagged it with a yellow thing saying it's a little hard for him right now, but he's working on it. And then anybody else on the team looking at Trello knows that he's working on it, what the status of it is, and then they can go, hey, saw you're having a little trouble with the login, do you need a hand? That's the division between Trello and Slack. And if you don't know how to use Trello, like I said, I will be happy to show you. I can show you examples of companies that are using Trello right now and how they are using it. It's free. And in fact, if you sign up and then you invite other people to it, you get what they call Trello Gold, which allows you to do like stickers and other cool fancy things. It doesn't really add any features. You mainly just get stickers. So if you want stickers, that's the way to do it. But use Trello. It matters. And it doesn't have to be Trello. It could be Asana. It could be Pivotal Tracker. It could be Jira. Any project management tool works. Just use something to track the tasks that your team is working on and what their status is. Use something like Slack or Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever to communicate back and forth about the human side of building your app. Now, on the topic of communication, set expectations and commit to them. if I say, hey, I'm going to get the login done by the end of today, then by the end of today, I should be saying, hey, I just submitted a PR for the login. Can somebody please review it? Or I should be, I should have a very, very good reason as to why the login didn't get done and set a really clear expectation as to when I'm going to catch up. If I communicate with my team, I build their trust. Ghosting is never, ever acceptable. You're not going to be sitting in the same place at the same time on the weekends. Or maybe you're going to choose on the weekend that you're going to come into the lab and work here. Maybe you're going to meet at JJ Bean across the street. Maybe you're going to go and sit in the middle of Stanley Park and get rained on. Whatever it's going to be, agree as a team and set those expectations. Maybe you've got concert tickets, or maybe you've got a date this weekend, or if any of you still manage to maintain a relationship through boot camp. Whatever the deal is, just say, I'm not going to be here on Saturday night. I'll work extra hard on Sunday, but Saturday night I've got plans. If you set that expectation with your team, they know not to be messaging you going, hey, where the heck's the code you're working on? Be just mature, professional about that, and communicate with your team the way that you would expect them to communicate with you. That's it for me. You have any questions? Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, they review the code first, and then they accept it. Yeah. No, they'll actually push it back to you to fix those. Yeah. It's not accepted at that point. Yeah. And the really cool thing is what GitHub does now, and they actually stole this from GitLab, is when you push to your, like if you push a branch up, it'll actually say, hey, to create a pull request for this, go to this URL, and you can just copy and paste that URL from the terminal into your browser, and it will, create the pull request for you. But your pull request, is kind of like an enhanced commit message where you want to say, like, this pull request brings in this and this and this and this and this, and I added this library and I, did this. And then that way, when someone's going through and looking at the code, they can see, what the changes were and how to, how to gauge what that work was and whether it accomplished what you said it does. Oh, and please avoid the phrase, but it works on my machine. Just avoid that one. I'll send out this presentation. I've also got a gist of a whole bunch of resources for like free wireframing, free content generators and stuff like that I'll send out to you guys. It's time.